Well, you know, the first objection obviously is the Bill of Rights, as you said. Really, you have a right to privacy, and they shouldn't be allowed to look at your records unless they think you've committed a crime. But the second aspect of this is it's not a very good way to look for terrorists. For example, the Sinarif brothers, the Boston Marathon bomber, we knew he was a potential problem, but then somebody forgot to look and find out that he had flown back to Chechnya. So we're not doing a good enough police work. We can't seem to keep up with the people we've been told about. Remember the underwear bomber? His dad turned him in, and we couldn't keep up with him. He still got on a plane, and yet they think somehow they're going to go through billions of bits of information every day. I think really we have to step back and say, is this good police work? But also, isn't our right to privacy more important than this?
Well, would you then say it's broad sweeping, the least effective method possible, and the most intrusive on our rights?
Yeah, and I think the thing is that really this is what our founding fathers fought the revolution over. At least one of the points is they objected to general warrants. These were warrants that didn't specify who was going to be searched, so the British soldiers could go from house to house. Now we're going from computer to computer, not of people who are suspected of being terrorists, of every American. They're going through 1 billion phone calls a day, and from your phone records, they can track your movements. That's why I was joking about telling the president I'm in Philadelphia, because I called my wife earlier so they can ping that, and they'll know that I'm actually in Philadelphia tonight. And really, do we really want them tracking our whereabouts? Well, you know, they're looking at 1 billion phone calls a day is what I read in the press, and that doesn't sound to me like a modest invasion of privacy. It sounds like an extraordinary invasion of privacy. The Fourth Amendment says that you have to look at, and you can ask for a warrant for a specific to a person, place, and the items. This is a general warrant. This is what we objected to. What our founding fathers partly fought the revolution over is they did not want generalized warrants where you could go from house to house with soldiers looking for things, or now from computer to phone without specifying who you're targeting. I have no problem if you have probable cause and you target people who are terrorists and you go after them and people that they're communicating with, you get another warrant. But we're talking about trolling through billions of phone records. We're not talking about going after a terrorist. I'm all for that. Get a warrant, go after a terrorist or a murderer or a rapist, but don't troll through 1 billion phone records every day. That is unconstitutional. It invades our privacy, and I'm going to be seeing if I can challenge this at the Supreme Court level. I'm going to be asking all the internet providers and all of the phone companies, ask your customers to join me in a class action lawsuit. If we get 10 million Americans saying we don't want our phone records looked at, then maybe somebody will wake up and say things will change in Washington.
Well, you know, if the government's going to use cameras to watch us, they need to have probable cause. They need to have an argument to use the Constitution to do surveillance on us, and then I'm okay with it. But willy-nilly on everybody all the time in open spaces, I'm against that. One thing that's lost in this debate, though, is almost all the cameras that were used to catch these young men in Boston were private cameras, and I'm not opposed to private companies using surveillance cameras to protect their property. Senator, well, you have to have probable cause for the government to be involved in surveillance. We had a big Supreme Court case last year on whether or not you can put a GPS tag on someone's car without a warrant. It's not that the government can't do it. They just have to ask for a warrant and say, this guy we think is committing this crime and is involved in this, and this is our evidence so far. We want to follow him with a GPS. But imagine the world we would live in if you had politicians who didn't like their opponents and they put GPS tags on their opponents. You've seen the acrimony in Washington. Would you want one side, Republicans or Democrats, to have the ability to do surveillance on their enemies or people they don't like their speech? It's a terrible precedent. We need to be very, very careful with allowing expansion of cameras.
Well, you know, I think the question is, and see, it's a bigger question, it's really about whether or not when you give your records to a third party, you still have protection. Because the court actually may well rule, according to the court cases from the 1970s, Miller and Smith, that your records, when somebody else holds them, you don't have a Fourth Amendment protection. I disagree with those rulings and think we need to revisit them because your cell phone records actually can be used to trace your movement. So last year the Supreme Court had a case about GPS, whether the police can tag your car with a GPS finder and track you without probable cause or a warrant. Supreme Court said no. I think your telephone's somewhat like that. They can track your movements, so I think they need to have a warrant that says you've been accused of a crime and there's probable cause to believe that we need to track your movements. But we shouldn't go through the records of 100 billion phone calls a day. I would say I'm an originalist. You know, I like Scalia, I like Thomas on the court. They're my two favorites. And I think we look back at the real meaning of what the Constitution was, and it did mean you had a certain degree of privacy that the Fourth Amendment granted, and we've been going in the wrong direction for a long time. So this is a very healthy debate if the country will have it, but the debate's not about the person or the leaker. It's also not about the National Intelligence Director lying. It's really about whether or not your private records, when someone else holds them, when a bank holds them or the Visa company holds them, whether you still should have privacy. I want to know, when the FBI uses a drone to fly over my property or someone's house, are they getting a warrant first, or are they just doing it willy-nilly because they can? The thing about a drone is it has amazing ability to look everywhere from 50,000 feet, so you don't know you're being spied upon. And I think that that kind of spying goes against the right to privacy that all Americans have. And I want to make sure that this isn't being done without a judge's warrant. If it is, I will highly object to what's going on and try to stop it.